Dr. Baskins, I want to just say welcome and thank you for allowing us to spend some time with you and just figuring out a little bit more about some of the good news and some of the things that you're doing. With me is Paul Goldberg, and we're going to take a little bit of your time just to kind of figure out a couple things and one to share some good news. So why don't we start off with sharing some good news? I heard recently something happened at Pittsburgh. I was just trying to figure out what position did you get?
Well, first, thank you so much for the time and opportunity to talk today. It's really an honor to be here. And yeah, a bit of good news. I was recently appointed as the deputy director of the UPMC Hillman Cancer Center. So really excited about being one of the three leaders here for our cancer center and really advancing work to eliminate cancer as we know it.
That's fantastic. And I know Paul and I have been jumping at the question, and Paul, you may know this, but I was thinking to myself that this is an unusual deputy directorship in a way that not just because the data show that there are very few women that are deputy directors right now, particularly of NCI comprehensive cancer centers, and certainly there are very few minorities. But what's even more unique is that you actually are coming from the AD of outreach and engagement. So what's going to be your approach? Because typically these deputy directorships are typically either they're oncologists or they're basic scientists. So what's your approach and how are you approaching this job through the lens of your lived experience and of your professional experience of outreach and engagement? How is that going to work?
Yeah, it's definitely not lost on me that this is extremely unique. And I think it also is a testament to the leadership here, our cancer center director, Dr. Bob Ferris, and certainly other leaders to recognize how important population science, community outreach and engagement is to the core mission of our cancer center. So I think, bringing a unique set of skills in terms of how do we advance population science, how do we use our behavioral techniques to disseminate and implement all the wonderful discoveries that are out there? I think that's very unique in this situation and something I'm really happy to be bringing to the leadership.
Paul.
Didn't I don't know if there's another center. I'm sure there has to be that has a deputy director who is a an expert in outreach and engagement. Does that exist? I don't know. I mean, this is a baseball statistics question.
It does now. Actually, when you talk about the first time, I think Dr. Baskin would be the Jackie Robinson, if you will, of actually this sort of approach of outreach and engagement folk being the deputy director. And it is it's rare. And I think that we'll go back to the record books and check, but I think this may be the first of this kind of model, which I'm excited about, as you know.
Yeah,
Yeah, is this correct? Are we both correct?
I'm pretty sure it is. So I certainly have never seen that model, and I've been in this space around community outreach and engagement and health equity work for a while, and so I'm not aware of anyone at this level of senior leadership that has that as a background.
No, I believe, Paul, this is why this is fantastic. And this is why I thought this interview was timely. And I'm going to get to your path of outreach and engagement and, from beginning to end of how we got from A to B. We'll get to that in a second.
I love stories about how it happened. So how did this happen? Whose idea was it? Yours or was it Dr. Ferris's?
Yeah, so I think that it's probably a combination. One of the things I certainly felt from day one when I took when I took a position here at University of Pittsburgh and the Cancer Center was that there was tremendous value for what I brought to the table. And so even without a formal title, certainly I felt that my thoughts, my ideas were certainly very much considered in all the decision making that was happening at the very top. So I think it was a natural kind of thought to sort of move to another level as I had conversations with the director about my career path and what was interesting to me, and as the person who actually recruited me to the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Tawfiq Owanakoko, as he moved from Pitt over to assume a cancer center director position recently, I think there was a open spot there for us to have conversations about where the future would lie for me. And I think it was an equally mutually agreed upon sort of thought about, well, what is the future for you and how do you get there? And I think we realized that people don't typically see leaders in outreach and engagement or even pop sci really leading cancer centers. And so by being in this role of deputy director, it gives me more exposure to some of the things that I think will be helpful as I think about other career paths within cancer centers. And so I think it was mutually beneficial between myself and Dr. Ferris.
The number of Black directors of cancer centers has gone up quite a bit from zero, and it happened rather quickly. But the thing that I don't understand at all, and I'm asking this with full understanding that March is a Women's History Month, why I would think that there would be like about a third of the cancer center directors would be women, and maybe 2/3. It really doesn't really matter. Somewhere in there, something massive. And it's not happening. Is this because there aren't enough deputy directors who are women who are capable of, or who are allowed to rather move up to the director level?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly we're talking about history. Really excited about the 5 Black cancer center directors that exist right now. Super excited because I know all of them, and so we've had conversations. I see them as mentors and definitely people that have helped me throughout my career. I also will say, in terms of history, there is not a Black female cancer center NCI designated cancer center director, and I think there are many of my colleagues that have been definitely pointing that out and waiting for that glass ceiling to be broken. In terms of why not, I think it's the same reason why we don't see, a tremendous amount of representation and diversity across the biomedical workforce. I think that some of it is biases and structural issues that make it difficult for women and people of color to advance. Even though they may be in positions, they don't have the opportunities to move into leadership. They also may not be thought of in terms of what does a leader look like. If the pattern has always been males or individuals who identify as white or white male specifically, then even when you see someone different, you don't think that they actually belong. So I think there are a number of reasons why, but some of it is there may be a structural issues that are making it difficult for people to get into those leadership roles. In order for some of these positions to exist, somebody's also has to give up power and leave those positions, which I think is another way that's very unique here that Dr. Ferris has done with this position. It wasn't to remove an existing deputy director, it was adding another position. So it added another opportunity for someone to lead. And it just happens that, the 3 of us together now, Deputy Director Jeremy Rich, who was previously existing, with a basic science and clinical science background, to be working in concert with Dr. Ferris. I think it's a perfect match with all of our talents.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and in 2019 and 2020, 2021, and I think, Paul, we can get the numbers right. 2022, there actually literally, as you sort of said, there was only one cancer center director that I think I'm familiar with them,
Yes.
It
of
was
color.
you.
And it's been consistent in this context that along with that message was that there have been shrinking number of women, and that since 1971, honestly, having right now currently no African-American woman, and Yolanda came, I think, a couple years ago, a year or two ago, that having no African-American woman just seems to be out there. The shrinking number of women, though, in these leadership positions. In fact, we would have, and I think Paul answered the question about the expansion of growth. The contraction of growth has been somewhat troublesome. So in your role as AD, are there plans that you have in place of being able to, in at least at the level of UPMC and Hillman, be able to drive a different type of pool, both locally and nationally? What are your plans to do that?
Yeah, definitely, great question. And we've certainly had many conversations about how we diversify our workforce, but also how we retain and advance many populations that are currently not as representative. So part of it is, we're embarking in a space right now as we do our plan to enhance diversity to get a good picture of the landscape, not only of the numbers of who do we have in those different demographics, but a look at the environment and the culture and how people are feeling about inclusiveness and feeling like there's equity. We've had a long history here, for example, with a women's initiative task force that was started under Dr. Ferris and has grown. And we've had a number of wonderful national speakers that have come in, talked about some issues. We've had frank conversations about where both current women faculty and trainees, but also individuals who are trying to recruit, what their feedback has been. And we're steadily kind of mapping out a plan for how we address those issues. But one of the issues I think both of you recognize is that sometimes what the challenge is when you come in and you don't see anyone that looks like you feel like this is not an environment that is welcoming of someone who might be from a diverse background. So I think just being an African-American woman in a senior leadership position positions us in a different way now so that people can see, yes, I can go to this particular center and they are elevating people that look like me into a position like that. So I think that also helps.
I'm wondering, and this is kind of moving this off to the issue of the not rapidly enough growing number of women cancer center directors. Do you think it would make sense for women who are cancer center directors and deputy directors perhaps as well to be kind of a separate political voice? And I mean onco-political voice. Would that make sense? Would somebody actually do it?
I think there are some of us that are pretty stubborn and they've reached a point in their lives or, have enough gray hairs that are willing to stand up and, and really speak truth to power and sort of talk about these issues. I think that, again, just by having diverse perspectives in the room, the conversations are not the same because we're there. And so we will point out where you're having conversations that may be biased towards one group or the other. And so I think it really is important to use our voices collectively to really push upon, our colleagues, NCI and others to recognize that the audacious goals that we have to, for example, cut the cancer mortality, in half in 25 years, that means we've got to have different people at the table than have been there in the past.
So I got a follow-up question. So, I'm a big proponent of and have been around talking literally about the science of outreach and engagement.
Yes.
In your role as deputy director, particularly with an outreach and engagement focus, how do you think that this position will help you advance that science, bring forth a new platform, or be able to actually really impact and transform what you may be doing differently at Hillman at the moment? So I'm just trying to get a sense of, again, your vision in this role as deputy, and that how will you advance really, and I mean it, the science of outreach and engagement. I've been going around saying it, and there is a science, there's
Absolutely.
a literature, there is a body of literature. So how will that actually, how do you sort of see that influencing what you will be able to do in this position as deputy?
Yeah, so I think, for my own research, I am a community engaged researcher. So I have for, 25 years or so focused very specifically and intentionally about engaging members of the target community as true partners in our science. I remember early on as a junior, faculty member, having arguments and trying to justify the work I was doing in communities, giving talks and things of that nature as being scholarship. And really recall, some very brutal evaluations where people were saying, you need to stop going to these, churches and schools, and you need to do more of this, that, and the other. But I'm happy to say we've really moved a very long way in this space, so much so that we have things like the Compass program right now, where NIH is literally funding community organizations to lead the science that's related to some of these issues, as opposed to the academic institution. So absolutely, I think using my platform here locally and certainly nationally to talk about the science of community outreach and engagement. I'm very happy to be with a group of colleagues. Dr. Winn, you're aware that, VCU Massey and Mayo, City of Hope and MD Anderson, UPMC, we've all come together, and UCSF, we've all come together to really focus on how do we elevate this science of community outreach and engagement? We have an inaugural conference about that coming up in May, where we're bringing people together to talk about research methodologies that are specific to community outreach and engagement. How do you enroll in clinical trials and involve community outreach and engagement? So there are a lot of ways that we think we can elevate this concept around the science of community outreach and engagement, including ensuring that reviewers for CCSG site visits have that expertise. So it's great to have lived experience, not doubting that at all, but we need people to be actually credible in the science to be evaluating cancer centers on these issues.
I would love to find out about where you were born in Atlanta and
Yeah.
how was your career path taking you in this direction?
Yeah, so it certainly was not linear. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be a deputy director at an NCI Cancer Center. But I did grow up in Atlanta, which I think is a very significant foundation for a lot of what I do. So I grew up in a space where I saw a lot of people that looked like me, that were in leadership roles, that were really galvanizing their community in order to, make it a better place for them. And so that was really important. So I was on a different path career-wise in my thinking. And then my senior year in high school, I lost my father to colorectal cancer. He was diagnosed late stage 4. Within a few months of the diagnosis, he had passed away. And so that made a major implication, had major implications for me and what I was going forward with. I chose to choose a career in psychology, primarily because I saw that what my family was experiencing in that loss, and then really didn't see a lot of people that looked like me that were in positions of professions of mental health, or even talked about that was not a norm in the African American community to talk about how do you go and get help when you're having these issues. So I went to that that as a career, and sort of my career, I'm a psychologist by training, and went and did that work, and really I think maybe unconsciously avoided cancer. And then what happened was I ended up getting a position, my first faculty position at Emory in the School of Public Health, and worked with Dr. Ken Resnicow, who had just gotten a grant funded by NCI. And so he had asked me to come on board. And so I started to learn more about the community engaged research and a couple of trials that he had going on. And then as I shifted over to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, I became connected with the cancer center director at that time, Dr. Ed Partridge, and the ongoing NCI's funding of these special population programs and community network partnerships, which is where I think Dr. Winn and I first kind of connected. It really gave me insights into how you can build a coalition, a true partnership with community organizations where you're sharing budgets, you're sharing decision making, and got involved in that Deep South Network for Cancer Control. And that really just sparked my what I think was my calling to really focus on these issues, particularly cancers where we have prevention and early detection. No one should die from colorectal cancer. And that really was something that galvanized me to really do this work. So I think that's probably where I am and why I'm passionate about it. And I think, having some of those great role models to sort of show how there is a science to community outreach and engagement, how we have to value the community members. Because again, as probably heard the saying before, if the problems are out in the community, the solutions are there as well. We just need to treat and value the expertise that is in the community in the same way that we value the expertise in the ivory tower.
So as a follow-up to that, what are, you talk about a couple of the people that inspired you, a couple of people that got you really thinking about the importance of population science, the importance of outreach and the science of outreach and engagement. Could you just talk about a couple of those people who have inspired you along the way, including people in your family?
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly the inspiration from my father, typically when we talk about African American communities, we're talking about individuals who, maybe lower income, not educated, and so forth. I mean, this was a man who was middle class, college educated, had all the resources and the insurance. And the fact that he died at age 51 from a totally preventable cancer got me to think about, well, what are some of the other things that get in the way with people doing and getting access to that screening as possible. So I think that was certainly and is still a very powerful motivator for me to do this work. I think also, certainly, as I mentioned, Ken Resnicow, who's in the similar role, outreach and engagement at Michigan, really helped to teach me about how you can be thoughtful in communities, how you can do rigorous science with community members, and help them to craft their questions and find solutions that are really impactful. Dr. Ed Partridge took me under his wing. So when I started as a junior faculty member, I got a diversity supplement through NCI's Cure program. He was my primary mentor, and he kind of walked through not only the science piece of it, but I think he was one of the first to really talk about my career development. And in fact, I sent him a note recently to just thank him as I got this position, because we talked about two paths for me in leadership: the traditional academic path, going on department chair, dean, so on and so forth. But he also talked to me about leadership within the cancer center in the NCI sort of network. And at the time I said, oh, do you really think someone with a PhD could be a cancer center director or could be in a senior leadership? And he said, absolutely. And so we talked about that, and that was important. And then honestly, I think, Dr. Winn, you certainly was one of the people. I will also say, sort of looking at your career and how you advanced, and your passion for engagement with the community has certainly been important. And then just one-on-one. I mean, every time I see you in a conference, I'm like, hey, your willingness to sort of give me a few minutes of time and give me advice. I think that was important. Dr. Selwyn Vickers, who was the dean at UAB at the time,
Oh,
also a very important person who, again, believed in this
wait.
work, and certainly was supportive of my career during that time, and wanted to see me thrive at UAB, and was delighted when I got the opportunity to come here to Pittsburgh. And then lastly, Dr. Tafik Awanakoko, as I mentioned before, he was someone that I actually tried to recruit to UAB, but he ended up, getting out of that search and came here to Pittsburgh. And when he reached out to me, I sort of saw in him a great deal of leadership, passion, and the things that I saw that I wanted to follow. And so those are just some of the names. I'm sure there are lots more that I'm missing out, but those are some of the ones that are really inspiring me to do this work.
And can I just have one other follow up? And Paul, I'll turn it over to you. I know we're down to a few couple minutes, but what would you see as we talk about the science of immunology, and we talk about that field? We know that the checkpoint inhibitors has been the new thing that has evolved, that wound up being the sort of killer application. What are the new thinkings, or how has the science of community outreach and engagement and behavioral pop science, what are the new things that are actually happening that you're excited about, that shows the evolution and the growth of the field?
So I think dissemination and implementation science by far. So it's really taking a scientific view of how you can actually implement the discoveries we already have found out. So yes, we want there to be new fabulous treatments and other kinds of procedures that are going on. But one of the things that Dr. Partridge always would say is that if we didn't find any other discovery, if we could just implement the ones we've already had and get them to the populations that are currently not being reached, then we could actually continue to eliminate those disparities and improve the quality of life and extend life. So dissemination and implementation is a science to figure out what works for whom and how can you move individuals from a behavioral standpoint. So I'm super excited about that. I'm also excited about looking at different ways to do that dissemination. So our traditional medical models are: you go to a physician, you might get a little bit from a nurse, but what we've demonstrated in a lot of the work is that you can train allied health professionals, health extenders, community health workers, patient navigators, particularly as you're talking about communities that are sort of more distant to the cancer center itself. So your rural populations and so forth. And my own personal research has found that those are credible sources. So issues what we bring up a lot in those marginalized communities around trust. If you train people that are right there in the community, they know the cultural context. They are the ones that are very trusted. And so you can give a certain concentrated amount of training and they can help there. So I'm super excited about that. The other thing I'm excited, it's not necessarily innovative, but it's about we have to diversify our trials so that representation in our clinical trials is abysmal. With some of our major discoveries within cancer, and you look at who the populations are, they are not reflective. And so I think it's really exciting to have these conversations that move away from individuals who are minoritized, don't want to, they're afraid of, put in XYZ study that they're afraid of. That's not one of the major reasons why people are saying that they're not in trials. They're not in trials because we're not asking them. They're not in trials because we have a bias and think that, oh, because they're African Americans or because they live in rural areas, they don't want to do that. So we've got to deal with that. We also have to deal with some of the structural issues of some of the trials. Are there exclusion criteria that make no sense to safety that are eliminating some individuals from being able to get into those trials? At the cancer center level, which we're doing here, we're starting to do, taking a look at those trials. Do we have trials that are really relevant to the catchment population that we have? And if not, those are the ones we need to go after. So those are the things I'm really excited about. I'm excited to have a voice and have a senior leadership team here that has welcomed me into the fold to make those decisions, and really excited about what we can do.
Well, I'm excited about you, and I'm excited about what you're going to do. And by the way, historical fact, and I think Paul probably knows this. What I love about where you are and why you're doing it, and this commitment to the community, is that when we think about the first curriculum for EMS, that was the Freedom House, and the Freedom House were all people within that Hill district, African Americans who
Yes.
actually figured out how to take care. So I think you're historically, the echoes of that are carrying over to today, and I think it's fitting that we would have our first African-American deputy director in this role, particularly with the outreach and engagement sort of component, community focus and the behavior stuff, really in Pittsburgh. So I tell you that to say that I'm super excited about what you're about to do, and I will be just watching and cheering and seeing you break through all of those glass ceilings, and but not only for you but for others too. So I'm going to
Absolutely.
turn this over to Paul to wrap up.
Yeah, maybe I should be asking both of you this question. Well, Dr. Baskin, your expertise, the area where you've really focused your early work is the Deep South. You're now in Pittsburgh. How do these disparities issues differ regionally, or do they? Is there anything to be learned in Alabama that can be applicable in, say, the Bronx?
Yeah. So, great question. What I found is probably similar to the genome. We're more alike than we are different. And so I didn't appreciate until probably I was here several months, just the similarities between the two cities, Birmingham and Pittsburgh. A lot of similarities, including that history of racial residential segregation. And then also about, the previous economy being much more into the industrial area and steel, and now the transition over to healthcare, banking and technology. So there are a lot of similarities there between those two, but there's also a lot of similarities in Western Pennsylvania. So our catchment area is the 29 counties of Western Pennsylvania. A significant amount of that population are individuals living in rural communities. And so those experiences that I had from coming from Alabama and then the work I did in Mississippi are very similar. So no, they're not largely African American populations, but the issues are similar in the sense of education and poverty and lack of actual access to primary care providers, health literacy. Those things are exactly the same. And the solution, I think, is exactly the same. And that's one where we take local individuals, we train them, we give them, help them to become an extender of the healthcare system. That's the same. So I do find that, yeah, I need to learn a little bit more. I say yins instead of y'all. But at the core core of it, there's still the basic needs. People want to feel like they belong. They want to be treated with respect. They want to feel included and giving the resources that they need to live a healthy life.
So, you know what? Thank you so much. I know, Phil, I know we're at the end, and Monica, I just want to sort of say that we really appreciate your time to be able to share your story with us, and to really share the excitement of the advancement and the progress of the importance of outreach and the science of outreach and engagement and what it contributes to the overall reduction of cancer health disparities or just cancer burden.